forward to the session. Well, looking very much forward to the session this evening. Thank you for joining us. And so let's open with a word of prayer, and then I'll do a very brief review of the last couple of weeks, and then turn things over to our presenter for this evening, Larry Keener. So Jay, if you would please open us in prayer, please. And Jay, let's go ahead and open in prayer. And currently your mic is muted.
Thank you. Oh, Heavenly Father, we thank you that you gather us tonight on this unusual format, on this unusual time. We are here because we love you and we want to hear from you how we ought to live on this troubled time. We indeed live in the most troubled time we have ever experienced, and we need to understand how we came to this point as a nation. We are under attack from multiple front. We feel with our skin the war raging in our spiritual room, this chaotic situation. Thank you for this. And why it happened and how it is, what is happening in should know how to live in this life. Thank you for wrote for this particular time, and I thank you for your wisdom and the diligence on the Jeffrey's part to gather us together to educate us and then motivate us to live the way that you want us to live. Our eyes, open our mind, understand what you're trying to say to us so that we will know how to live in this troubled time. I pray that you give the wisdom and that we get the clarity of mind to the speak today. To bless Jeffrey and his ministry for years to come. And I pray, I thank you for this time together, and I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you, Jay. And again, thank you, those of you who are joining us, and we'll begin promptly here. I'll do a very brief review of the last couple of weeks. Then I'll introduce our speaker, Larry Keener, and turn it over to Larry for the rest of the evening. So let me share the screen here. And this, for those of you who've joined us the last couple of weeks, this will look quite familiar, but I think there's great value in at least a modicum of repetition. And so we are looking at the most recent book by Rod Dreher, Live Not by Lies. Many of you know him also for his previous book, The Benedict Option, a great book. We talked about how that in order to have a meaningful conversation with people, whether they're Christian or non-Christian, to have a meaningful conversation with folks these days, there's basically three issues that unless we have general agreement on, our attempts at probing deeper into these matters will probably be an exercise in futility. And the first issue would be, is American culture becoming progressively better or worse? And believe it or not, there are many people who would argue, oh no, things have never been better. And usually they're thinking about all these remarkable, incredible technological innovations in recent years, medical technology and other things that supposedly simplify our lives and so on. But of course, we're interested in the moral and ethical and spiritual state of America, not just all the wonderful toys that we have that have been developed just in recent years. Secondly, is there actually a culture war going on in America? And I think you'd be surprised interacting with other Christians on this matter, just how many are absolutely clueless about the culture war. And thirdly, is authentic Christianity countercultural? And there again, I think you'd find great confusion even among many Christians and church leaders on this issue. Now, we talked about these political orientations. I won't spend time going back over that this evening, but you notice the standard approach is that the far left or communism and Marxism is the opposite of the far right, which is Nazism and fascism. And as we've said before, this is a totally nonsensical approach, but this is terminology that's typically used. A much more instructive and much more elucidating model would be the revised two-dimensional model. And again, if you'd like, several people have contacted me in the last week asking for a copy of this chart, and I'll be happy to send it out to you. All right, again, by way of a necessary preface to all of this, we'll talk so much about this neo-Marxist, or what Rod Dreher oftentimes refers to as soft totalitarian progressive agenda. What is their agenda? Well, I think we can summarize it in 5 points. One is they want to secularize America. They want a godless America. It's an explicitly anti-Christian orientation. They want to sexualize America, everything from kindergarten and elementary school on up, everything is sexualized. They want to racialize America and thereby polarize and divide Americans along these superficial lines of skin color. They want to socialize America in this sense. It is a socialist agenda, as Rod Dreher emphasizes in his book, and they want to politicize everything. And we've even seen this in the world of sports in just the last 3 or 4 years, how politicized even that has become. R.C. Sproul's quote, "I doubt if there's been a period in all of Christian history when so many Christians are so ineffectual in terms of shaping the culture in which they live, as is true right now in the United States." I mean, how shameful. As I wrote in American Crisis, the idea of a culture war is not a popular topic, but in reality, there are in fact 2 Americas, and these 2 Americas have goals and values that are absolutely incompatible. And from point of fact, the culture war is real, whether we prefer to acknowledge it or not. And the most alarming threats that America currently faces are internal rather than external threats. The quote from Robert George, the legal professor at Princeton: "The days of comfortable and socially acceptable Christianity," he writes, "are over. One day we will have to give an account of all that we've done and failed to do in this life." But that first sentence, the days of comfortable and socially acceptable Christianity, those are over, probably never to return again. So in summary, American culture is rapidly degenerating into a new dark age marked by spiritual, moral, social, economic, and political chaos and collapse. Secondly, the culture war has been raging in America for decades, and the forces of secular humanism are winning decisively. And thirdly, true Christianity has always functioned as a countercultural presence and a witness in opposition to a very decadent world system that celebrates narcissism, hedonism, and materialism. Without a firm grasp of these truths, many readers, reviewers, and critics of the Benedict option or Live Not by Lies will constantly flounder about in a perpetual state of mystification. These are those people who constantly complain, why can't we just be nice and get along? These are also those who constantly cry, peace, peace, when in fact there is no peace. So a couple of weeks ago, we had an introduction of Rod Dreher and his writings, his warnings against soft totalitarianism, the quote by Lenin that the goal of socialism is communism. The United States, founded on Judeo-Christian classical liberal principles, has become expressly anti-liberal, liberal in the true sense of the word, and it's also becoming increasingly post-Christian. Dreher puts it this way: we cannot hope to resist the coming soft totalitarianism if we do not have our spiritual lives in order. This is spiritual warfare going on, and we see it in the news every single day. Chapter 1, the thesis there was anti-Christian totalitarian government poses the greatest threat to American society and culture in our nation's history. Few churches and Christian ministries are even attempting to prepare Christians for the challenges that lie ahead. Chapter 2, Rod Dreher writes that under the right conditions, yes, totalitarianism can in fact happen here. Chapter 3, which Eric Smith led us through last week, the thesis being the myth of so-called progress. Again, when people talk about progress, they're usually talking about progressing toward greater and greater degrees of socialism and government control. Also, they usually have in mind technology and science and its developments in recent years. And that is exclusively how they would define, quote, progress. Marxism, as Eric explained last week, is a secular religion. It's a surrogate alternative to Christianity. You can have a religion that's godless. Buddhism, for instance, is essentially a godless religion, but it's still a religion. And Marxism is as well in many respects. And of course, what's central to neo-Marxism, cultural Marxism that we experience today is this cult of social justice. But it's a total perversion of the biblical idea of social justice that we encounter in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Chapter 4, capitalism, woke and watchful. The thesis there, woke capitalism is a natural ally of socialistic soft totalitarianism. People used to think that big business and corporate America were an alternative to the left. We see now that in many respects, they've come together and cooperating on a set agenda. So Big Brother is oftentimes being promoted by big business. And Eric talked last week about China and what he called the mark of the East that's becoming more and more influential in world social and political reality as well. So kind of a play on words, the mark of the beast that we encounter in the book of Revelation. Well, here we have the mark of the East. So with that, let me opt out of the PowerPoint. And many of you might have heard Larry Keener's presentation 2 or 3 months ago on this book. And Larry grew up here in Marietta. He's a former professional baseball player. He worked most of his career for Palm Harbor Homes, eventually based in Dallas, Texas, and eventually became the CEO and chairman of the board for Palm Harbor Homes. He retired just a year or so ago. And Larry and I were very good friends in high school and beyond. And I've always admired Larry as a very intelligent, very serious, very thoughtful person, and a very committed Christian as well. And he and his wife, Trink, live in Dallas. They've lived there for 35 or more years. They have 3 adult daughters and 4 grandsons. And as I said, he retired last summer, and that now affords him ample time to read great books, such as, for instance, Live Not by Lies. And so it's a real pleasure to have Larry with us this evening. And Larry, very much looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. I think some of you were on the call. I apologize for the dogs. The Amazon man must be here. Some of you were probably on the call a couple of months ago that Jeff was talking about. But before I get into that, I'd like to say a word of thanks to Eric Smith and the presentation he gave last week on chapters 3 and 4. I thought it was excellent. I got some things out of his presentation that I definitely didn't get out of reading the book, even though the book is quite informative. When I did the presentation on the whole book a couple of months ago, I did a pretty extensive set of notes on every chapter, but I've expanded those for tonight's presentation since we're only doing 3 chapters, chapters 5 through 7. And I've also added some current information, things that are happening currently in our country that really prove just how prescient Rod Dreher was in writing his book. His book was written in 2019 and before, and published in 2020. And I think he would write an even more earnest book were he writing it today, given the things that have happened not that his book wasn't earnest in its own right, but I think things have even moved faster than even he thought they would. His book is divided into 2 parts. We've already been through part 1. Part 2 is about how to live in truth. And chapter 5 is about value nothing more than truth. And what I'm going to do now is see if I can't pull this up and share the content in case you do not have. Well, I thought it was, here we go. And I think I'm going to be able. And there we go. I think that's better. So as I said, chapter 5 is about valuing nothing more than truth. And it begins with another quote from our friend Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Russian dissident, that says, value, one word of truth outweighs the whole world. The key takeaway in this chapter, I think, is that there are very few people who are willing to speak the truth and endure the resulting suffering. The chapter starts off about talking about Václav Havel. If you don't know who he is, and I suspect this is an informed crowd, I expect you do. He was a communist dissident in Poland who was very active in the Solidarity movement in the 80s. He was also a renowned playwright, and after Poland broke away from the Soviet bloc, he became the president of Poland. And he speaks about the power of the powerless. You can save your own soul by living in truth, and that he believes in small acts of rebellion that have great power. In other words, you may have to live in a world where totalitarianism is rampant, but that does not mean that you have to accept it, and you can rebel in small and moderate ways. When I first came on tonight, I am a Methodist. I know Jeff has kept me informed about what's going on at the Mount Bethel United Methodist Church. And while that in terms of that church is not a small act of rebellion, in terms of the entire United Methodist faith, it probably is. But I think it's a great example of what Václav Havel was talking about. Rod Dreher goes on to say that the system, meaning the totalitarian system of socialism and communism, depends on demoralization. Or in other words, it depends on the destruction of hope, so that people feel like they have no other option other than to live the lie, which is demoralizing. And it destroys the dignity of the individual. It's the old Russian saw when a worker was asked, how did he like living and working in Russia? And he said, they pretend to pay us and we pretend to work, is really, an example of how they were living the lie, and it was destroying the dignity of the individuals. But it does offer a false piece of conformity. People accept their lives and they are not hassled. But it's a false peace because they do not have the dignity of being able to live in truth. the false peace of conformity was something that was propositioned by a man by the name of Vladimir Grigorenko, who I did not know. I had to look that up, and I found out that he's a Russian dissident that is now living in Texas. A side note, I think that the state of Texas traded our entire Democratic Legislative Caucus for Vladimir Grigorenko. I think that's what we did. And they fled to DC. I know we're getting a lot of calls on how other states can get rid of their Democrats. So perhaps that is something that Texas has done correct. Anyway, living in truth is lonely but powerful and liberating. And it goes on to talk about Christians as permanent outsiders and countercultural. Jeff just talked about that as well. In this chapter, Dreyer is talking about dissidents living in truth within totalitarianism. But as I read it, the underlying part of it to me was, as Christians, we are dissidents living in the totalitarianism of sin. And there's a lot to be learned from the dissidents living under totalitarianism for Christians who are living in the totalitarian world of sin. He goes on to talk about rejecting doublethink and fight for free speech. I think today we would call doublethink the narrative. There is a certain narrative that's prevalent in this country today, which says that the founding was corrupt and failed, that America is racist to the core, everything about America is wrong, and needs to be replaced with a better system. That's the narrative. Anyone who dares to object to the narrative, in other words, exercise their right of free speech and tell the truth, is actually nearly silenced anymore. We're seeing that every day from big tech. We're seeing it from government and big tech actors. So the doublethink today, I think, is the narrative that we live in. And finally, Dreyer talks about, you may live in a world of lies, but you choose if that world lives in you. And of course, Romans 12:2, that we are supposed to be in the world and not part of the world. He goes on to talk about cherish truth-telling, but be prudent. He says you need to be courageous, especially in soft totalitarianism, but truth does not require martyrdom, but it does have consequences. There's different levels of courage. There's times to stand up and be heard. There are times to resist, and there are also times to perhaps bide your time and make sure that you are not being pulled along in the stream, but are in fact using your brakes so that you can resist the narrative. And that totalitarians, both hard and soft, left and right, use propaganda to control the common narrative. And we know what the common narrative in this country is today. Political correctness, which seems almost quaint now. It's more than a couple of decades old. The things that we hear about now are critical race theory, intersectionality, white supremacy, white fragility, white privilege. We talked about the failure of the founding and the falsity of the American traditional history. Christian beliefs as hate speech. If you do not believe in same-sex marriage and you say so, you're guilty of hate speech and being intolerant. And more current evidence, as I was preparing for this, I read an article, an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal on July 6th that talked about the teachers union going woke. They had just had their, both teachers unions, the National Education Association, American Federation of Teachers, had just had their national conventions. And in case you don't know, those two teachers unions are the largest unions in the country, and they are the largest contributors financially and in kind to the Democratic Party. So I'm going to read this because I think it's very important, and it really points out what Dreyer was talking about relative to propaganda and the narrative. The National Education Association, the largest teachers union, held its annual meeting last week. That was the week of July 1, and the measures approved by delegates deserve broader attention. One calls for the union to support and lead campaigns that result in increasing the implementation of culturally responsive education, critical race theory, ethnic studies in curriculum for pre-K through 12 and higher education. Now, this is a group that hasn't been able to teach our kids math and English. I didn't put this in here, but the Wall Street Journal went on to quote stats that less than 50% of fourth graders in America can read at a fourth grade level, and less than 50% of eighth graders in America can read at an eighth grade level. Critical race theory is a neo-Marxist ideology that is pervasive in higher education and teaches that a person is defined above all else by race, gender, and sexual orientation, that American institutions are designed to ensure white supremacy and the patriarchy. The delegates also directed the NEA to lobby for professional development around cultural responsiveness, implicit bias, anti-racism, trauma-informed practices, restorative justice practices, and other racial justice trainings for all school employees. The delegates call for similar training of students as well. And the Wall Street Journal goes on to say just what second graders need: instructions on how to distrust kids with different skin colors. What the teachers were saying is that their teachers and school employees need to be indoctrinated into the 1619 Project, which I think most of you are familiar with, which says the true founding of America occurred in 1619 when the first slaves arrived on the North American continent, and not in 1776 when the Declaration of Independence was signed. This is something that was written by Nicole Hannah-Jones, a reporter for the New York Times. It also, maybe you know of this gentleman, his name is Ibram X. Kendi. Ibram X. Kendi wrote a book about how to be an anti-racist. The thesis of the book is, and I will read this to you. Kendi says, the only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. In other words, discrimination yesterday, discrimination today, and discrimination tomorrow. Those of you of a certain age who grew up in the South can substitute segregation for discrimination, and that's exactly what the Jim Crow era was in the South. Moving on, the Wall Street Journal continues. Another delegate-approved measure calls for unions to issue a study criticizing empire, white supremacy, anti-blackness, anti-indigeneity, racism, patriarchy, cis heteropatriarchy. I had to look that one up. That's alleged dominance of society by heterosexual males. Capitalism, ableism, anthropocentrism, and other forms of power and oppressions at the intersections of our society. In other words, this is intersectionality. This is what people talk about when they're talking about intersectionality. Moving on. Another approved statement asks the unions to join with Black Lives Matter at school and the Zen Education Project to hold a rally on George Floyd's birthday, honor other victims of police violence, and promote, quote, a national day of action to teach lessons about structural racism and oppression. The Zen is the Howard Zen that Jeff has warned us about so many times, the author of A People's History of the United States, which is the primary text for teaching American history in most K through 12 grade classes, as well as some colleges. But that's not the worst part. Moving on, Believe it or not, union leaders claim that parents who oppose any of this are motivated by hate and are assaulting free speech. In a speech Tuesday, American Federation of Teachers President Randy Weingarten claimed that culture wars are labeling any discussion of race, racism, or discrimination as CRT to try to make it toxic, and bullying teachers and trying to stop us from teaching students accurate history. She likened the backlash to historical revisionism in the Soviet Union and other repressive regimes. Well, there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, Randy Weingarten is claiming now that they represent the mainstream culture and parents are the countercultural people in America. I think when Dreyer wrote this book, the left was the counterculture, and now it's parents who believe in old line American values and Christian values that are countercultural warriors. They flipped the script. We'll talk a little bit more about this in chapter 6 and 7, as far as the education of our children and what they're being educated with. In America, move up here. Forgot to move the page. I apologize. In America, we do not risk the gulag or death by challenging the lie. We risk only loss of status, acceptance, maybe doxing, social media bans, and possible advancement at work or in other clubs or in other places. I think that since we're talking about soft totalitarianism and the results, this is what could be called soft persecution. And we've seen this happen many times in the last few years, where soft persecution starts when a small group of online social justice warriors, usually amplified by big tech, social media trolls, and the Twitter mob, identify a person or group as unwoke due to past disfavored words, deeds, or associations. And the story is soon picked up by mainstream media, typically resulting in the cancellation of the unwoke offender. Dreyer ends the chapter the way he ends most of the chapters in part 2, with his See Judge Act recommendation. And the C in this particular chapter, chapter 5, see that political correctness, wokeness, critical race theory, etc., are what they are, the lie. And to judge the neo-Marxist, anti-Christian, anti-traditional liberal agendas of these parties as the lie they are. They are nothing more than self-righteous moral vanity as a way and a path to power, because power is the ultimate objective. How do we act? Protect the young, preserve our true cultural and Christian memories, then pass them on to future generations. Fortunately, we're seeing all around the country where school boards that allow this type of lie to be taught in school are being recalled. They're being challenged by parents, and parents are beginning to actually awake in a good way. Any questions on chapter 5 before we go on to chapter 6? Okay.
Larry, I was going to ask if Randy Huff is joining us tonight. Okay, I don't hear a response. Randy is on the school board of Fayette County.
Okay.
So if Randy is perchance with us this evening, maybe he can comment afterwards. Yeah, Randy, if at the end of our session, I think we'd all like to hear from you, just a brief response to what Larry's said already. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. And I'll just remark, in the first opening moments of the presentation, I've jotted down 32 remarks that I wanted to make at the end of the presentation tonight that I thought were eminently relevant to the topic. So
Well, you'll have to talk fast.
I'll talk. Okay.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Randy.
I'm
All
eating
right,
I'm eating my dinner, Jeffrey. So I'm going to take my video down while I'm talking.
All right, so moving on to chapter 6, which is cultivate cultural memory. And the famous George Orwell quote from 1984, who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past. And of course, that's what we're seeing, is that the culture warriors of today want to rewrite American history so that they can control the past and also control the future. The takeaway of this chapter is that young Americans' ignorance and lack of cultural memory is the reason why they prefer socialism to capitalism. And he goes on, Dreyer goes on to talk about why memory matters. And he quotes some polling that was done in 2019. The majority of young Americans, 57%, hold a more favorable opinion of the Communist Manifesto than the Declaration of Independence. Gallup poll from 2019 shows 61% of people aged 18 to 24 view socialism favorable versus only 58% for capitalism. Yet 84% of the same group is unable to define socialism correctly. 84% could not define what socialism meant. More recent polling on this issue was published recently by Issues and Answers on July 5, 2021. First, the good news in the poll. Is pride in America a thing of the past? Not if you ask Americans. As the nation celebrates its 245th birthday, the first in a series of Issues and Answers polls finds that 68% of adults say they are very or extremely proud to be Americans, with another 15% moderately proud. So 83% of Americans, based on this poll, have some level of pride in being American. Even among Blacks and Hispanics, who are repeatedly described as victims of embedded American racism and intolerance, pride is strong. The poll found that 55% of Blacks, I'll bring this up, 55% of Blacks and 57% of Hispanics say they are extremely or very proud to be Americans. Just 7% of Blacks and 9% of Hispanics say they aren't proud at all of their nationality. And now the bad news. So which is the one and the only one demographic group in the Issues and Answers poll that is not proud to be Americans? It is young people ages 18 to 24. The poll found that only 36% of this group say they are very or extremely proud to be Americans, making it the sole demographic group tracked among whom pride falls below 50%. Pride in America rises to 59% for those in the ages 25 to 44, 75% ages 45 to 64, and 86% for those over 65. It's not scientific, but it seems to me that that also has a correlation with the different histories that those age groups were taught, different American histories those age groups were taught. Dreyer goes on to talk about creating small fortresses of memory. One of the most important things about the lie of socialism and communism and progressivism is that it has never worked in any place ever despite the entire coercion of the state apparatus. We're seeing it right now playing out in Cuba. It's played out miserably in Venezuela, which was the richest country in South America just 2 decades ago. And now people are starving there because of socialism and progressivism. But for progressive, socialism and communism's failures are not of the idea, it's of execution, not of intentions or core principles. In contrast, progressives believe Western civilization's roots are inherently racist, imperialistic, and paternalistic. In other words, good intentions trump good results. And it's interesting because it just seems like there's just no limit to the amount of mischief that can be caused under the guise of good intentions. The media and the educational industrial complex have conspired to destroy our Western culture and Christian roots, and they are succeeding. That's, Jeff pointed that out so well at the beginning of this session. The new targets are the foundations of the traditional American culture, the family and the church. We know that all other institutions in America have already been corrupted. The media, entertainment, corporate, government, unions, education, academia, even science. We saw that during this pandemic. And as Jeff said, even sports are now corrupted with the lie. Make parallel polis into sanctuary cities. Václav Bendel, who was a dissident in Czechoslovakia, mathematician and a human rights advocate, created the idea of parallel polis. Rod Dreyer, we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute, but Rod Dreyer is a big fan of Václav Bendel, and primarily because he defined himself through his refusal to abandon reason and learning, resulting in the loss of tradition and memory. Parallel polis requires resistance to the lie and its attack on traditional values and Christianity through remembrance, celebrations, and transmission to future generations. And think about it in our country today. There's an attack on Christmas, even using the word Christmas. There's an attack on July 4th as being a celebration of liberation for everybody but Black Americans. The American flag has become a symbol of hate to many people in America. All of these things are part of our cultural memory that are cherished by us, that we want to transfer on to future generations, and they're under attack. The See Judge Act of Chapter 6 is that the good news of Christianity, the Declaration of Independence, and the US Constitution, our shared cultural heritage, are under attack. Judge, the powerful governmental, institutional, and corporate interests want to delegitimize our shared cultural heritage and replace it. And act. Be vocal and be active in protecting and preserving our shared cultural heritage. Seek out like-minded persons and groups to join in to strengthen this effort. I live here in the Dallas area. We have a suburb called Southlake, Texas. You may have heard about it. Southlake is a fairly good sized city located between Dallas and Fort Worth in what's called the Metroplex area. It's an enclave of fairly wealthy people who control the local school system, what's called the Independent School District, ISD, of Southlake. The teachers there wanted to put in critical race theory, but they didn't call it that. They called it teaching it accurate history. The parents rebelled, many meetings, a lot of conflict, but in the end, the parents won. The school board's been replaced. Teaching of critical race theory will not occur in the Southlake School District. Now that's a microcosm, it's one school district, but I tried to get some information, and maybe Randy can help us, but the last numbers I saw were that there were 54 local school districts under recall or in some form of, well, under recall. The school board was being recalled just for teaching things like critical race theory and the 1619 Project. The other thing I would say is that on the parallel polis, where you're living a parallel life in a bad environment, in a bad society, I think that in the Jim Crow South, the Black churches in the South were living a parallel Paulus. They were Christians. They had hope. They loved and cared for one another. They fought for equal rights. They fought for equal justice. They fought for equal opportunity. They did not fight for equity. They didn't fight for social justice, and they didn't fight for quotas. They wanted a full participation in the American experiment. And I think that's a great example of how parallel Polis works. Any questions on chapter 6 before we move on to chapter 7? Okay, we'll move on here. Chapter 7 is about families and families as resistance cells. I found a quote from John Paul II that says, "As the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the whole world in which we live." If you're not familiar with Pope John Paul II, John Paul II was one of the more instrumental people in the fall of the Soviet Union. He was a Polish Pope. He backed solidarity when it was breaking away from the Soviet Union. And he was recognized by Ronald Reagan as one of the 3 most important people in the fall of what he called the evil empire. He was a great man. The key takeaway from chapter 7 is that strong family ties and values are an indispensable bulwark against totalitarianism. So he talks about the relationship between the family and the totalitarian state. Rod Dreyer says Christian families are incubators of love and truth. They're civilization's bedrock. There is no freedom without truth. There's no truth without love, and there's no love without God. Families are the first line of defense against the lie. They're the first place. It's parents' responsibility to make sure that their children grow up with the right values and know truth, understand how the world works, understands God's love for them, understand how we were all equal in God's eyes, understand how the American experiment is really that entire family writ large. Progressives seek to diminish parental influence in shaping their children's spiritual, historical, and ideological values. I point back to the convention of the National Education Association and American Federation of Teachers. Totalitarians of all stripes try to break down traditional families. The courage to resist, the willingness not to conform, and the strength to live in truth starts with the strong nuclear and Christian family. Rod Dreyer points out that we have many pitfalls today that society's never had before. Consumerism and materialism teach children that their value is not in their values or who they are, it's in what they have and what they own. Obsessive social media is really an evil thing in a lot of ways for these young people. If you think about your own time when you were in high school or younger as a teenager, and you know how mean-spirited teenagers can be, but oftentimes you don't know that they feel that way. Well, with social media, everybody knows how everybody feels about everybody else. And there just seems to be no holds barred. It creates a very, very toxic environment for young people. Patriarchal tyranny, or those families where the father rules with an iron fist and everybody quakes and no one does anything that would bother the patriarch. Very little is learned in a family like that. The feminist excesses. The feminists now believe that masculinity is probably toxic in and of itself, and that young boys, young men, young teenagers need to be cured of their masculinity. And finally, child worship. Those families that their children are nurtured in the wrong ways and become the center of the universe of the family. rather than the children learning from the parents. One of the best parts of this chapter, and I think of the whole book for me personally, was Rod Dreier's description of the Christian family and the three things that the Christian family offers that is inimical to totalitarianism. First, and obviously, is love, but it's a love based on acceptance, mutual need, and reciprocated affection. Second is freedom, and that's the ability to make permanent and elevating decisions like marriage, having children, forming a family. And finally, and I think more important than any, is the dignity. Family is the only place where you can expect unconditional acceptance and where you have irreplaceability status. There's not someone waiting in line to take your place in a family. We're back to Vaclav and now Camilla Benda's Christian child raising examples while they were dissidents in Czechoslovakia behind the Iron Curtain. Dreyer never actually met Vaclav, but he did meet Camilla and Vaclav's children. And he sat with them several days, several nights, wanting to know how it was that they were able to withstand the totalitarianism of socialism, and how they were able to hold their family together, and how their kids were raised in such a way that they valued truth. And he pointed out several things the children did. These actually came from the children, talking about what they learned from their mother and father in socialist Czechoslovakia. Number one, they learned to model moral courage, and Vaclav used a rather unique instrument. If you read the book, you probably smiled a little bit when you saw it. He used the movie High Noon that he had a pirated copy of. If you remember, High Noon was early 50s movie about some very bad men that the local sheriff had put in prison who were coming back to seek retribution. The town was very afraid that they were coming back. They wanted the sheriff to leave because if he wasn't there, there wouldn't be any trouble. And he refused to do so, and he was by himself when the bad guys showed up. Number two, fill moral imaginations with good. Stories of courage and difference makers. We have no end of those in the Bible. We have no end of those in American history. They're all excellent examples of what it means to be, a true hero, a difference maker. Don't be afraid of being weird, is the way the children put it. As Christians today, we are a minority. We are weird in society's eyes in many ways, but we're supposed to be. When I was reading this, I thought about a scene. If you ever watched the miniseries A Band of Brothers, when the company in the 101st Airborne was being ordered up into Bastogne. Bastogne was the besieged town in the middle of the Battle of the Bulge that had been attacked by a German counterattack during the winter of 44-45. And the troops that were there in Bastogne were basically administrative troops and replacements and recruits. They were new people, because it was thought that no one would attack in the middle of the winter through a forest into this little town. But they did. And as a result, they were overwhelmed. And as they're retreating, the 101st Airborne is going in. And this Captain Winter, who's leading the 101st Airborne troops, runs into a lieutenant, and he said, ask him what's going on. And he said, there's 7 roads and they blocked 6. If you go up there, you're going to be surrounded. And his response to the lieutenant was, we're paratroopers. We're supposed to be surrounded. Well, we're Christians. We are a minority. We're going to be weird. And we need to relish in that. prepare to make great sacrifices. It's better to be right in the eyes of God than to be smart in the eyes of the world. You're never alone. Band together with like-minded and supported small groups. Create bridges and not gaps. This group, the Areopagus, is one of those small groups. Small, meaning less than 1,000. This is one of really creates bridges and not gaps. I haven't met a lot of you. Several of you I did meet when one of Jeff's sponsored trips to Israel, and I was very happy to see, as different as we all were, we were very much the same when it came to our Christianity. Practice hospitality and service to others. Create an expanded family and mutually supported families. And finally, one of the more important things that Rob Dreyer said was the love of mothers and fathers is the seed of the church. And I know in my case, that's true. I know in Jeff's case, that's true. We grew up together. I knew his mother and father very well. He knew my mother and father very well. We went to the same church. We had wonderful parents. I knew Dolly's parents less well, but they were similar stock. See, judge, act. See that the Christian family and Christian churches in America are the indispensable institutions. Other institutions in this country have been corrupted, but the indispensable institutions are still the Christian family and the Christian church. Judge our current culture is hostile to Christians and Christian families. I think we know that, but we need to remember that we are in the minority. And as Jeff reminds us, every time I've been in one of these meetings, Christians are countercultural warriors because of our faith and because of our families. And that ends the presentation, so we can take any questions anyone would have now.
I've got a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Ari. And I was interested in that concept of the Vaclav Benda had of parallel polis, because that's something that a lot of people nowadays are trying to do with using Parler as instead of Twitter, or Gab instead of Facebook, and things like that to get around the cancellation that we're facing. I'm just wondering, has that ever been successful anywhere?
Well, I don't think it's been successful yet to the same degree as Facebook and Twitter have been, but I don't know that it has to be. I think the important thing is that there are now going to be channels where Christian thought can be expressed. For instance, 1995, 1996, when Fox News started, they had very few viewers. Now they dominate cable news, cable television. So I think it has to have time before it can grow. But I don't know that it will ever be as big as something that pushes the things that are pushed in big tech.
And another question I have is, about forming groups, like associating with like-minded people to help fight back against some of these things. Normally I've always been involved in groups that share a broad worldview, like a Christian conservative worldview on a lot of different issues, and then working on various agenda items that they have going at any one time, right? But recently I came across a group that was organized just on a single issue, that of medical freedom, people who want to be free to decline the COVID vaccine if they wish. And another one that might fit that category is freedom of speech and freedom of journalism. I've come across people on the left and the right who both are alarmed about the censorship that's happening. Leftists like Glenn Greenwald and liberals like Naomi Wolf, feminist Naomi Wolf are concerned about that. And I'm wondering, what do people think? Would that be an effective tactic to just organize some kind of action group around a single issue so that you can meet a greater number of people who are willing to resist on that issue, and we might have more influence that way?
Personally, I think it would be. I think there was once a time in America when we were all traditional liberals. Some more conservative than others. By traditional liberals, I mean we believed in personal freedom. We believed in free speech. We believed in equal justice and equal opportunity in the traditional sense. Even if someone is of a different political persuasion, if they agree in those things, there are common ground there. And it's an opportunity to share. As Christians, it's also an opportunity to share why we believe and feel the way that we do.
Right.
Let me make a comment on that, if I might. Ari, first, let me comment. You mentioned that you thought Glenn Greenwald was a leftist. I would challenge you on that and suggest that maybe the right category is more like what Larry just mentioned, and that he's more a classical liberal, and we should be aware of the difference between a continental classical European liberal and even a more modern liberal in America today, and people who are truly on the left. There is a difference. And then on the idea of uniting with different groups, I think that's excellent, Ari. And I'll give you an example. Another classical liberal is James Lindsay. Are you all familiar with James Lindsay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So James, and I'll give you personal experience with that. I became aware of them a couple of years ago. He and Peter Bagoza and Miss
Helen
Pluckrose, and the background, so I won't take up the time in what they did to make their point. But I first saw in great detail the thinking of Peter Pagoza and James Lindsay through watching a 3-part episode presented by a Christian organization called Sovereign Nations. And the title of that 3-part presentation was Critical Theory, a Trojan Horse, or Intersectionality, a Trojan Horse. And so that introduced me to James Lindsay, and of course, that he and Helen Pluckrose came out with a book called Cynical Theories, which attempts to criticize critical theory as an ideology. So he became almost an instant star within the Christian circles, but he and Pagoza both, and I don't know about Helen Pluckrose, are confessed atheists. The first presentation was put on and overseen and presented or disseminated to the world by a Christian man, a Baptist. And so James Lindsay and Peter Pagoza came here 2 years ago into the city of Atlanta to make presentations at certain sessions that were put on by the group of people and denominations that were represented by the founder of Sovereign Nations. And then they had a breakout session, or finally a final section one night over in a big hotel room that I attended, at which there were probably 150 or 200 people there, and Lindsay and Pagoza both spoke. At the end, I asked the question, knowing that they're both avid atheists, how is it that you find common ground with Christians. And I asked that of James Lindsay. And he was asked the same question, by the way, by Al Mohler. Al Mohler is the CEO and president of Southern Seminary, one of the 5 Baptist seminaries in the country, and that one's located in Tennessee and
Louisville.
in Louisville, right? And
Louisville.
Yeah, well, it's close.
Louisville. It's located in Louisville.
Okay, great. I stand corrected. Okay, great. So he went on and gave an answer, but it hit me. What principle do you suppose he appealed to when he answered my question about how is it you find common ground? And because he's anti-leftist, all right. He left the teaching profession. He has a PhD in some esoteric, high-level, abstract mathematic topic, and the question was, how did you come to unite with Christians? Well, the principle I'm referring to is the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and that's the whole 9 yards. Speaking to what Harry said, is that we don't have to see these people as enemies. They're unbelievers, but we can make counsel with unbelievers for a common cause against a bigger threat. I don't know that we're stepping into too terrible an area that's outlawed by Scripture. I don't think it's unbiblical to make such common cause. Jeffrey, you're shaking your head. I think you agree, but that was his idea. He saw the world slipping away, and the only rock that he could join with a strong foundation was what? The church.
Yeah, I think you'll find others who are not professing Christians, but who understand that we share some very common goals and values and so on. Jordan Peterson would probably be an excellent example of this. Now, Jordan Peterson, of course, is not in any way anti-Christian. In fact, he holds conservative Christians in very high esteem. But yeah, I think that would be a good example. Francis Schaeffer wrote a lot about this back in the 1970s in his books. If you're not familiar with Francis Schaeffer, he was probably the most influential Christian intellectual of the last 50 years or so when it comes to what we call cultural Christian apologetics. In other words, taking our Christian beliefs into the wider realm of life's issues, economic, social issues, moral, cultural issues, even political issues. And Francis Schaeffer wrote a lot about Christians and people who are somewhat like-minded, who are not professing Christians. He called us co-belligerents. In other words, we're not allies in the truest sense of the word. We're Christians, they're not, and there's always going to be a definitive divide there. So we're not allies, but we are co-belligerents. And there are a lot of non-Christians who see the danger in all these things that Larry was speaking on this evening. And Ari, I think to get back to your initial question, I think we need to look for every opportunity to make common cause with people like that on specific issues. But of course, all the while we're working with and cooperating with people like that, and we continue to share the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we do it in a spirit of love. We don't compromise as far as that goes.
And Jeffrey, we have to keep in mind the very fact that we might fall into the company of these people is by design. Nothing happens but by the design and the will of God. So there could be it's a whole new field that opens up, does it not, to evangelism and to demonstrate Christ to these people, because they're already leaning towards desiring a more solid foundation in their lives than what the left is providing. And they're panic stricken that they'll get gobbled up by that machine, and they have nowhere else to go. They have no identity in Christ. What's left for them?
Well, that's a good point. These engagements that we have with non-Christians, when they involve areas of common concern, these are not obviously just happenstance, and so we can turn that into a true opportunity to share our Christian faith in the context of the common cause that we're addressing. Larry, did you have any thoughts on that in particular?
Well, just one thought, and it's kind of the reciprocal, and that is that I don't think I'm unique in this, but there are certain people in certain positions to me which bring out the worst of my emotions. And it's very hard to be a Christian towards certain people. And I keep on my desk something that's in front of me right now. And this was written a while back. And it says, there are two kinds of love. We love wise and kind and beautiful people because we need them. But we love or try to love stupid, disagreeable, and vile people because they need us.
Great.
This second kind of love is more divine because it is how God loves us. Not because we are lovable, but because he is love. Not because he needs to receive, but because he delights to give. And that's from, you might guess, C.S. Lewis.
Oh, I was going to say that sounds like something C.S. Lewis would have written, but I wasn't familiar with that. Other comments, questions as we move on? We still have 15 minutes or more here in our session. So,
Can I say something? This is Mary
absolutely.
Ann.
Yes,
Hello?
Mary Ann. Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't know if anybody got this email, but I got an email about the joint educational event on critical race theory that's happening tomorrow night at, it's in Marietta, but it's put on by, can you hear me?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay, it's put on by the GOP and the Truth in Education. And it's about critical race theory. So I'm going. So I don't know if everybody else
Mary
is.
Ann, we
but,
lost you there for a few
it-
seconds. You said you were
Oh.
going to.
Okay, I'm just saying that I'm going to the meeting tomorrow. It's at the Gunpowder Club or something like that. In Marietta, let's see. It is, anyway,
Sounds
it's
rather
a funny name. I
dangerous.
think it is the Governor's Gun Club or something. But which I thought was an interesting, it's a Governor's Gun Club. I think that's what they said. But anyway, I'll tell you what I gather from it. You know, when I'm going on vacation, but I'll get with Jeffrey and see if I find out anything interesting that we don't already know.
Would you mind sending me the information, and I'll send it out
Yeah.
to a lot of people. So if
Okay, well, yeah, because you have to buy tickets. So I don't think they're sold out. You have to buy tickets.
Okay.
So, but it's just $12, but I'll send it to you now.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Jeffrey,
Yes, Jay.
I just want to share what happened to me this week, just very briefly. I did not have my daughter and her family for about a year and a half. They finally came over. They stayed with us this week, last weekend, this week. And none of them really showed an interest in the work I did, the art, the drawing work. But the only one interested in it was a 13, I have two granddaughters, 13 and 16. The 13-year-old one is the one who has shown some interest in the work that I'm doing. And I was showing some of my work, and there's one drawing I made one drawing about the moral history of America. And the idea was that the title was American Apple, and I used the Apple logo that was used, like a LGBT colors logo of Apple logo. So I thought that really represent the moral decay of of this nation, how far we have come along.
Mhm.
So I kind of try to explain from, how the prayer was banned and the creation was not taught in school anymore, abortion and things like this. And finally, I ended up with the Equal Marriage Act in 2015. And I was shocked when my 13-year-old granddaughter told me, Grandpa, I agree with all these things, but I do not agree with this meaning 2015 Equal Marriage Act. And it really hit me home. The whole subject matter that you discussed today, I really hit me home this week. So
Well, are you referring to the Marriage Equality Act?
yeah, the 2015, the gay marriage was approved, legalized 2015.
Oh, okay.
That's what we're talking about.
Oh, I see.
And
Okay.
she's 13 years old, and she was bold enough to tell me, Grandpa, I don't agree with you. And I was really, really saddened by the whole thing. So I did not snap right back to her, and I'm hoping that I have a chance to talk with her about this before she leaves this week. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really hit me home
Well,
this week.
Well, remember that she's just absolutely inundated with LGBTQ propaganda.
Yeah.
And we need to be very, very deliberate and resolute in standing for biblical moral principles, because all this propaganda can just be absolutely overwhelming, especially for young people.
I was really sad about that incident.
Yeah. Other comments, questions? I want to save a few minutes to go back to Randy for his observations as a member of the Fayette County School Board, but other comments, questions anyone might have.
Got one more, I'll make it brief.
Yeah, sorry.
And that is that, we often say that socialism doesn't work, which of course is true for the broad society, but it actually does work really well for the 1% at the top that are controlling everything. And that's why they keep pushing the idea in every generation. And so it's really not being advanced so much on the merits of it, but on the power of the people who stand to benefit from it. We have the Fabian socialists like H.G. Wells and George Bernard Shaw and Bertrand Russell. And so, there a lot of the, and in this country, the Rockefeller, Ford, Carnegies, they're very wealthy and they love socialism because they stand to benefit from it. And I think if you go back even to the feudal period in Europe, the knights and the princes and the dukes and the earls and so forth, if you ask them whether they like serfdom, they probably said, yeah, we like it pretty well. We're doing pretty well with it.
Worked well for them, didn't it?
Yeah.
Well, in Larry's presentation, and Larry, I'll come right to you here. In Larry's presentation, he mentioned about how that socialism, communism, fascism, Nazism for that matter, these have all been abject failures. But what is their retort when you bring that up? Well, for decades now, what we've heard from the radical left is, well, true socialism has never really been tried. It got sidelined or perverted along the way. But the burden of history is on their shoulders to make a case that socialism has ever been effective and has ever promoted true social justice. It really has not. Larry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to address Ari's point. He's absolutely right. It is all about power, and it's all about power for a very select few. But the message of socialism is so tantalizing in its equal justice and equal distribution of the wealth, that the unassuming masses and the intellectual elites don't wake up until they realize they're living in a totalitarian world. And of course, the intellectual elites are usually the first ones that get silenced, the ones that supported it in the first place. Mm-hmm. Whether that's Cuba or Soviet Russia or North Korea or China, that's what happens.
Yeah. Oh, one other real brief anecdote, and then when I was in the doctoral program at Georgia State, there was an opening to teach at nearby Spelman College, which is a historically Black college for females. One of their professors was on sabbatical, so I taught at Spelman that year, and I remember probably my best friend at Georgia State in the doctoral program at the time kind of brought it all into perspective for me when he said, well, I thought students who go to Spelman go there specifically to avoid people like you. But that aside, I was not aware that just a few years earlier, Howard Zinn
That's right.
taught
That's
at
right.
Spelman, and I'm not even sure that I knew who he was at the time. But of course, it wouldn't have been very much after that I became aware of Howard Zinn. I wish I had known that. I certainly that would have been a factor that would have constantly been on my mind as I taught the students there. But Randy, would you respond as a member of the school board to some of what Larry shared this evening?
Larry, you did a great job. I wish in some ways that I hadn't become a member of the board because it's taking up so much of my time. I'm about to end my 7th month. So I'm under a year at this point, and been able to focus mainly, rather than all this time I'm putting in to learn how to be a board member, focus really on developing courses like we're having tonight, to go out on the road and teach critical race theory, critical theory in general, the whole 9 yards, to parents. If I had another 8 hours, if it was a 32-hour day, I'd be home free. I can just devote 8 hours, that extra 8 hours, to doing such a course, because people are thirsty for answers to this and they're not getting the right answers. We are blessed. Let me start off talking about the board. We're blessed to live in Georgia. All we have to do is we all should know where Loudoun County is now in the northern environs of the state of Virginia, up near Washington, D.C. You see most of the troubled parents who have become woke themselves are the ones giving out the biggest protest, although it's not exclusive there. Another thing that we mentioned tonight, the unions, teaching in the state of Georgia is not unionized. So they don't march to the drummer of somebody like Randy, what was her name? Randy
Weingarten.
Yeah. And that's a blessing. But we do have problems. There's several levels of challenge that I faced. One was the realization that even though I've lived here in Fayette County for 50 years and all our children went through the Fayette County school system, all did well. And I frankly never worried about things like content. And they got A's. And if my mother raised 4 boys besides myself, so 5. And I've got 5 grandsons in Fayette County and then kids in other schools. If my mother ever had an experience of having one of her children come home with straight A's, it would have been a miracle for her. So all our kids were getting A's. We didn't worry about it. But things have, but the youngest now is 38. So that's a long time passing, a small gap of time against the great scale of universal time. Nevertheless, a lot of change in Fayette County. but not to the point that it's changed elsewhere. And now I know that it's worse with respect to CRT and critical race and critical theory in general in the larger picture of the state of Georgia, but the state standards don't allow for it. And our governor has come out, as well as the superintendent of the school system, Dr. Woods, has come out and said we will not allow critical race theory to be taught in the school systems in the state of Georgia.
Randy, may I interrupt you just briefly at this point?
Sure.
Now, what are you all going to do when thousands and thousands of teachers who are associated with the NEA and the AFT, when they defy the state mandate and declare that no, in fact, they do intend to teach critical race theory, whether you like it or not, and whether the governor likes it or not?
Well, at the risk of embarrassing myself by answering this question, and it might be naive, you assume that the teachers in Georgia, Jeffrey, are members of the NEA and other unions?
Yes.
I did not. As far as I know, the teachers in Fayette County are not unionized. In fact, I know they're not unionized.
No, it's a voluntary union.
Right. Georgia's a right to work law, right to work. So,
Right.
so
That's right.
So now, when my wife Dolly taught for all those years, she was a member of the GAE, Georgia Association of Educators. She never joined the NEA or the AFT,
Yeah.
but I'm sure thousands, probably tens of thousands of teachers in Georgia do.
There were probably more than half at our school that joined.
Okay, well, I did embarrass myself. In my short 9 months, I didn't come to 7 months. I haven't learned that. When we were told they're not unionized, I put a period on that. I didn't know.
Randy, you would be amazed at the level of propaganda the unions send out to their teachers. And also at this convention, the union developed a defense fund, because states like Texas do have a law preventing critical race theory from being taught. And the defense fund is for teachers who out of conscience teach critical race theory and then are arrested or cited and suspended because they broke state law.
Right. Right.
Oh, and I noticed that George Weaver wanted to say something here as well. George, by the way, will be giving our presentation next week.
Sure. You've set a high standard, Larry, for me, and I'm not sure I can live up to your performance here. But anyway, on the NEA, the Georgia Association of Educators is the Georgia chapter of the NEA.
Is it really? Okay.
And teachers cannot be required to join, but it's a voluntary membership organization, and it is committed to all the same goals as the NEA. Now, there are other voluntary educator organizations in the state that compete with GAE, and GAE has been losing membership quickly over the years. It's way down from its peak membership. But the reason I know all that is because I've sued GAE a couple of times as an attorney, and I got to dig into some of their history.
Yeah, thank you. I stand corrected. And we thought back, now Dolly's been retired for 8 or 9 years, but back then we thought, maybe erroneously thought, that the GAE was a more conservative alternative. But that may not have been the case.
No, it's not. It's
Okay,
not.
so tomorrow, my first piece of business is going to go to the superintendent and find out how many teachers in the system or employees in the system. We've got 20,000 students here and 3,500 staff. And so how many of them how many of the staff are members of the NEA, right? And so I'll find out.
And the GAE is the local chapter.
The GAE. Okay. I hope I'm I hope I'm vindicated to find out that it's zero, but what you're telling me, I'm probably going to be disappointed.
I'm sure some are members. And one more point about GAE. GAE, its governing documents basically impose a racial quota on employees. See, GAE is a membership organization of teachers, but it also has its, full-time employees who work for it. And so there's a quota built into the governing documents of GAE requiring race quotas be met. And there's a long history for why that's there, but actually I use that as evidence in the cases I had.
All right. Well, I can say, I think on very solid ground, George, that there's no such guideline that's being followed in the Fayette County District, nor is there any such guideline in the state standards. And I'll quit there. So nobody's marching to the drummer here that I know of. They may have local influence based on numbers in small districts, but I don't know that they're influence. I know for a fact they're not. I'd have heard it by now that we have to be careful of what we do because of the GSC or anything like that. So I think I think I'm on safe ground to say that they have relatively little influence in the state of Georgia compared to, let's say, Virginia. Would I be on close to it, George, do you think?
I think that's true. The GAE has less and less influence at the state legislature, and there are other organizations that have a greater influence now than GAE does.
Okay.
Is there a conservative alternative, George?
Yes, there are a couple of them. One of them I've represented. It's called Teachers First. And it's based in Cobb County. And basically it stays out of politics. See, the GAE and the NEA are heavily involved in politics. They endorse Democratic candidates left and right and teaching critical race theory and all that stuff. But the one I just mentioned, Teachers First, and there's another one too, and I can't think of the name at the moment. I think it's PAGE, P-A-G-E. Those usually avoid taking political positions, which I think is the right approach.
Oh, that's the organization Dolly was involved in.
PAGE.
I'm sorry. Yeah, PAGE, P-A-G-E. Yeah.
Okay. If
I
could just finish
I
my
have a
comment.
question about that. Hello?
Sure.
Oh. I have a question about that because if the teachers individually want to teach critical race theory, they can't do that.
Right.
Right. And the Cobb County Board rejected critical race theory just this summer. So.
Yes.
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 But here's the problem. We're in Fayette County. We're fortunate here. We just at the same time I came along, 4 months before me came a new superintendent, where he was curated, let's say, in Gwinnett County, which is 5 times as large a system as Fayette County. So he comes down, and the first time I had a meal with him and alone, I brought up CRT. He said critical race theory will not be taught in Fayette County, in the Fayette County school system. And so great, got an ally. And so far he's held to that, and I don't expect that it will not happen. However, there are spirited teachers who are self-righteous and feel that they can insert certain aspects. They're not going full bore, or they know they wouldn't last very long, but they take opportunities to leak in certain things. But that's a primer for things that are more complex and more debilitating to the students. So we have to me, you talked about zero tolerance with having handguns on school property or even a knife. As a board member, I have zero tolerance for that, believe me. But that's not the thinking of the rest of the board. Everybody makes mistakes.
Well, and again, what's going to happen when thousands
Well,
of teachers in Georgia and other states defy the
Well,
anti-CRT.
Jeffrey, you know, what's going to happen? First of all, I'd question your premise in that will happen. I know what you're saying, but my experience in again here, but not across the state, there's solid Christian-oriented worldviews at work in Fayette County. You may grimace at that. Well, you live in
Well, that's a more conservative county.
yeah. So I can tell you this, and I'll end on this. Otherwise, we'll go to 9 o'clock or something. But I went to Georgia School Board Association training as a mandatory thing. I get 6 hours of time in my continuing education. Just a few weeks ago in Savannah, GSA's summer conference. Every member of the board went along with the superintendent. So there were 6 of us. You went a day early and you went to breakout, 4 different options to go, and you got 6 hours of credits. I chose a course entitled Equity: Social and Emotional Learning. And why? Well, simply what got my attention, it started with the word equity. And so I chose to go to that. Another member did. And I cannot possibly describe to you in a short period of time we have, but it's a let's call it give it the benefit of the doubt and say well-intentioned plan to help underprivileged children, typically minorities and low income level families that suffered crisis from divorce or whatever. And because they're going to come to kindergarten with social and emotional problems, and they're going to be behind grade, all that sort of thing. So it has a Christian appeal. You know, who doesn't want to help children? And so I'm sitting there listening to this, and trust me, the first speaker overheard 3 times she talked, used the word to achieve social justice at least a dozen times. So they're teaching to the entire, they're talking to members of the entire 109, however many districts we have in the state, 100 and how many, George? School districts and some city districts.
Well,
and there were people that applauded at certain times when I thought I was shocked.
mm-hmm.
So there's different districts sitting around in this massive room, and some applauded, to your point, Jeffrey. But as far as what are we going to do with thousands of them change, they're going to have a hard time overcoming state law. And I think
I don't think so, Randy, because they'll have one of the most powerful unions in the country behind them.
And they're going to walk out?
The NEA and the AFT. Well, who knows after what's gone on the last couple of years, you know.
There is some hope,
stop
though.
here and let Larry maybe summarize. And anyone who would like to stay on for a few more minutes, please feel free to do so. If you need to cut away, we certainly understand. But Larry, why don't you sort of close us out officially? And
well, I would just say this: there is some hope besides the hope that we have as Christians, and that is we can, in those places where critical race theory is taught, and it tends to be the blue states and the blue cities, the teachers will be just as ineffective in teaching it as they have been in teaching math and English.
Well, you're saying there is value in
incompetence may save us.
That's a wonderful note to end on officially. Thank you again very much for your excellent presentation. Very much looking forward to Georgia's next week. And blessings on your evening, the rest of your week. May it be productive and a satisfying week for you. And again, anybody that'd like to stay on for a few more minutes and chat, feel free to do so.